Hi, my name is Amy Finch, and I am here chairing the first in a series of podcasts that Transmedia Watch are producing to explore what the news might look like if it wasn't so obsessed by the trans angle. We know women to be a hugely diverse group of people. However, if you've been an observer of news or social media user in the past few months, you will be forgiven for thinking that our only public bathroom concerns focus entirely around if trans people should have access to them. Speak to any ordinary woman, and there are many other issues that are being ignored, like the overall provisions of facilities for disabled women, discrimination against lesbian and Black women, and much more besides. Joining me today to discuss, I have some incredibly talented women. First up is Jane Chudowska, who is a psychotherapist and media commentator. Jane was also editor of Diva magazine for some 13 years. Hi, Jane.
Hi there.
Next up, Ava Vidal, stand-up comedian, journalist, and media commentator. Hi, Ava.
Hiya.
And last but not least, Zing Singh, executive editor of Vice UK and author of the Forgotten Women book series. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me here. Hi. So let's kick off. Jane, could you explain some of the experiences and issues that you or your friends have faced in kind of public spaces and bathrooms?
Sure. I mean, I think everything is weighted against women with toilets and trans women and women with disabilities, have an additional level of discrimination, as do many masculine of centre and butch women who, in my experience, both personally and, friends, have been frequently policed by non-trans women in women's toilets, making it quite a difficult place and space to be in. A sense of not being welcome and not being a place which is safe for them. And also, we can't forget that single space toilets have also been sites of unsafety for, gay men, for example, and gender non-conforming people, who have experienced physical and verbal harassment in toilets, as do gender non-conforming women in toilets, as well as trans women, obviously. I think that's partly because of patriarchy, and I think because the toilets that are created are not designed with people in mind other than men, essentially. There's a whole history of that. I was reading about the history of toilet planning, it's like bedtime reading. And Clara Greed, a British urban planning scholar, says, from the outset, public toilet provision for women has been seen as an extra, as a luxury, or as problematic. And I think that, we've had to adapt to, the limited provision, and as such have had problems with that. I mean, I know of trans women, for example, who just absolutely, try and avoid at all costs going to any toilets, because it's difficult to get into a men's cubicle if they're still, living in stealth, or don't feel they pass, enough to be able to use women's toilets. And they have to, when they go out, just not drink at all, so they get dehydrated, or they can only drink small amounts, and they have to wait till they get home where they can go to the toilet, and this produces all sorts of health issues, which also affects non-trans women, who might have to wait for ages to find a toilet, and so I think that we need, in terms of solutions, I think that we need to change the way people think about toilets. How about thinking about toilets being the most important design consideration when buildings are being, public buildings are being designed. Everybody has to go to the toilet. It's like one of those certainties, like death and taxes. We all have to go to the toilet. And there are places, but they're usually places that are quite posh, like Sketch, for example, but have these pods where you go into a pod, and regardless of your gender expression, and then you have a shared washroom area, and that kind of thing seems to have been successful in some secondary schools that I've been reading about as well, where the toilet cubicles have been you know, fully enclosed for male and female, but the washroom area that they sort of break out into is for everybody who uses the toilets. And it's produced reductions in bullying, in vandalism, and it's been really good for gender non-conforming school kids, intersex kids, and trans kids who can choose. I mean, my preference would be to have female toilets, male toilets, and gender neutral toilets, so that there's something for everyone. Toilet provision is essential. It's a basic need, and it's not considered enough, you know, when in public planning procedures.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, those are my first thoughts, really.
Ava, can you relate to anything that Jane has just said in terms of your experience or friends?
Yeah, only that only that sort of butch friends and stuff. I mean, I had a really quite nasty argument that I was commenting on toilets and basically saying that this policing, it doesn't sort of suit certain types of women. And I had a black lesbian who's quite well known, who's in my DMs, really attacking and abusing me, saying, "You've got no dog in this fight. Who do you think you are saying anything?" And I was like, well, I know more butch women who will get stopped. And I was like, I'm not being rude to you or anything, but this is going to affect you more than it's going to affect me. Like, how can you not see what you're doing here? And I just thought, you know, I don't have any expert level like Jane or Zing has. I'm not, you know, I've only ever written about trans issues from a cis point of view on how much to me as a black woman it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's about it really. I'm more like a layman really when it comes to this. Like, how can you not see this doesn't make any sense?
See other people's perspective in their use as well. Yeah,
it affects so many of us, and as a black woman I'm so used to being policed. We're not feminine enough, we're not weak enough, we're not gentle enough, and it just spills out to everything else. And this toilet thing is like, Jesus, who cares? Have you ever really sat in a cubicle going, hope a trans woman's not sitting in the next cubicle, hope she's not, hope, like, no one, what is this? What is this?
Zing, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with what everyone said as well. When I was younger, so in my teenage years, I was quite butch, and I would frequently get mistaken for a boy, especially when I went into toilets. And as I got older, I started presenting in a more like femme way, and my experience of using toilets completely changed. So everything from, you know, me walking in with very short boyish hair, really wearing really hideous outfits like baggy billabong jeans with the chain on, and then immediately being clocked by everyone else in the queue and with a kind of "what are you doing here" kind of face. So it's everything from really subtle cues to show that I wasn't welcome in a space that I should have been welcome, to people just straight up really pointedly showing me the door and saying, you know, the men's is over there. And then there would be an awkward minute where I would have to explain that I wasn't a man and I needed to pee like everyone else, and I needed to use the loo that they were in. So I kind of can see it from both perspectives. And when I started dressing in a more feminine way, I was really shocked at how different the experience was and how much people took for granted that just because my appearance was of a certain demeanor that I was automatically afforded access to the correct toilet. So when the issue of trans women and men having access to toilets came up in, you know, the British media, I was really shocked by how willing people were to police the way people looked and could access public facilities, because I know firsthand that it's so uncomfortable, the feeling of being told that you don't belong somewhere and that you need to go somewhere else. It's not a very nice sensation. And I think that a lot of the people doing the policing, maybe with the exception of the person who slid into Ava's DMs, don't really have that experience of being made to feel unwelcome in a space where you know you have a right to be.
Yeah, and it's actually quite shocking when you look at the public discourse that many people don't realize how often that these experiences are not being reported amongst all this kind of polarization. And actually just how surprised they might be to see this. And you've all mentioned experiences of abusive or confrontational situations. Have any of you heard or experienced situations where you had to report abuse in these public spaces? And if so, what's kind of been the outcome? Has it been taken seriously?
You mean in toilets specifically?
Oh yeah, mostly toilets, but yeah, any other kind of single-sex spaces.
I've only ever had, like, you know, the usual like talks you're giving and stuff like that, where people have tried to put their foot down and, you know, it becomes a battle. Is it trans inclusive or isn't it? And, you know, talks at universities or talks at, you know, any women's meetings. I gave a speech in Oxford, and there was some people there that were not happy at all. It wasn't really sort of policing beforehand, but it was as soon as I mentioned trans women, that was really the end of that. And they really took exception to it and were being really, really nasty about it.
So it can kind of shut down the conversation in a way because it became so toxic.
No, they didn't, because I gave my speech and I wouldn't have that. But it was afterwards in the Q&As, just the unreasonableness of it was shocking to me.
And Jane, you mentioned people who have perhaps been harassed, gay men in toilets and lesbians in toilets. Have they ever had to escalate this into reporting a crime? What's been the outcome?
I have not heard of that. I mean, I don't think I would have even thought of doing that necessarily. I mean, if I had been assaulted, perhaps, but it's, you know, I don't know of it, but I do wonder whether it would be taken seriously. I mean, I guess it would be if it was an assault, but I think that it's what Zing was saying about, you know, being confronted and questioned. You know, you're dying for a pee, you go in, and then people, you know, looking at you, just sort of like pointing and just saying, excuse me, do you know this is the right, you know, do you know which toilet you're in? It's just like, you know, seriously. And you don't need that. You just don't need that. So yeah, it's problematic, but I haven't heard about people reporting it.
I think you have to also take into account, like, a lot of black trans people not going to the police. A lot of black cis people, we're not going to the police. Right. So I think that would be a kind of a sort of dodgy way to measure it, because we're not going to go down that route. It's bad enough just being black in the first place. We really don't call the police unless we absolutely have to.
It is shocking that this level of abuse is having to be endured without any kind of follow-up. So in terms of, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that maybe, you know, lesbian and gay toilet users have thought that too, and, you know, may not have reported because they just thought it wouldn't be taken seriously.
Or even, you know, if you were in a leisure centre or something where you could report to management, maybe it's not even an escalation to the police, but it's some sort of escalation and acknowledgement of that harassment. That these things are going unreported and ignored in the conversation is problematic.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, that kind of low-level aggression when they use public facilities is almost seen as the price of doing business. So it's not right that people should just accept that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think that looking at police figures, for instance, is an accurate way of measuring levels of transphobia or homophobia or misogyny, really, in the world. But there aren't, you know, other than if you're in, say, a private space, like if you're in a club or a bar or something and escalating it to management, but then that won't get recorded either. So I think a lot of people have these experiences of feeling very unwelcome in toilets and bathrooms, but we're just never going to hear about them.
Also, I mean, you know, there may be like, you know, some intersex women I know who have facial hair who have had trouble, you know, in both toilets, you know, whether they go to male toilets or female toilets, and so gender neutral is the preference. But, you know, because people's general kind of awareness around difference and otherness and different kind of gender expressions is so minimal still, you know, it makes things really, really difficult for, you know, intersex people who have a you know, gender variant gender expression. And I think that, you know, that along with better design, thoughtful design considerations around toilets and toilet provision, you know, in general, I mean, there are so many, all of this stuff is kind of intersectional. You know, we need to you know, do all the other things like, you know, confront white supremacy, you know, challenge ableism, you know, understand more about different gender identities and expressions. I mean, there's just so much that needs work concurrently.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a really good point you bring up in terms of looking how we design these bathrooms, because what's not included in our conversation today as well is about how this disability access as well impacts how not able-bodied people are able to access these spaces and their user experience of it. And it absolutely is, I believe, about flipping our thinking in terms of how we provide for toilets, and even, you know, the capacity provisions for women is sometimes lacking, even when you then don't go into these kind of different lived experiences of women out in public.
I think a lot of mothers say when they're wheeling around that pushchairs, when they go, oh my gosh, how is it for disabled people, you know, to get into these spaces? I think it's really important now that if we're addressing toilets, like we start, like Jane speaking about schools. I mean, I have a friend who has a and actually the non-binary child gets stopped going into the girls' toilets a lot more than the trans child does, because we're just so keen to put everybody into a box. And the non-binary child just, you know, whereas the trans daughter sort of has a more feminine appearance, and so people are more accepting of that. And it's just, honestly, like, we just need to get beyond the basics of, oh, this is what you look like, you belong there, and because it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I've seen many posts with trans men saying, really, you know, with full beards and stuff, you really want me in the women's toilets? It's just, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, what I was saying there about the, you know, mums and kids, you know, one of the knock-on effects of having, you know, of the, you know, positives of gender neutral toilets is that it makes things more accessible for parents. So if you're a dad with a daughter or a mum with a son, then, you know, you safely go into a toilet, which perhaps might have been a bit difficult, you know, with single sex only toilets. So a trans inclusive toilet design can actually, you know, it makes sense for everyone.
I don't know if it's,
I mean,
oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's just me. Zing spoke about her experiences. Sorry, do you identify her? Is that right?
Oh yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I do identify as a cis-woman.
Like, to me, this is a really recent thing. Like in the last 5 years or so. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong because it just didn't affect me. Maybe I just didn't really see it. But for goodness, what have we been doing all these years?
Absolutely. Well, we just like many of the experiences
What's wrong with it?
mentioned, we've been enduring it. Yeah, and not speaking up.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I know that around, you know, a butch or masculine of centre presenting women, that's been going on for, you know, ever since I came out, I think, which was, you know, a very long time ago now. And, you know, I think that the other thing is queues. You know, the reason why there are so many queues outside women's toilets is because there's not enough of them, and the whole kind of ratios that plumbing and building ratios are sexist. And, you know, they're not, you know, women are not considered by the people who are largely the people who are doing the designing, who are men who do not think about these things, because it is not, you know, in their interest to, or it's not, you know, they don't consider it to be important enough. And, you know, I think there are some in America, there are some, you know, cities and states that have tried to campaign for changes to these kind of plumbing codes, and that have altered the ratio of men's to women's toilets. And apparently that has addressed things a little bit in terms of provision, but not nearly enough, because, you know, let's face it, there's always queues for the, you know, for the women's toilets.
And when you have men design the bathrooms, you don't take into account all the added, not complications, but as a woman, in terms of, you know, we're more likely to experience biological differences such as menstruation and things that mean we use the bathroom in frequency differently to men, and that's what's being left out of the conversation.
I think
is there anything?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's also a space thing, right? So if you're a designer and you're designing the loos in a government building, for instance, you'll probably end up allocating the exact amount of space to the men's toilet and the women's toilet. But if you think about how much less space a urinal takes up in the same, you know, in say 10 by 10 square foot room, you know, a bunch of men can go in and out and use that urinal really speedily. But if you try and build the equivalent amount of capacity in a women's toilet, you're going to need a much, much bigger room. But I think most of the time, the design space allocated for men's and women's loos are exactly the same.
They are.
Yeah, I think that's true. But they must be horrible to clean. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I think that, you know, I mean, I think about the toilets in Japan, and their self-cleaning, you know, toilets, and, you know, they might be expensive, you know, to begin with, but if they're self-cleaning, then presumably maintenance costs are going to be, you know, cut down. And, you know, imagine if you had the toilet of your dreams. You know, I want a toilet that self-cleans and blows me dry, frankly.
So this media debate that we've seen recently over the summer, what have you taken away from it? What have you been most disappointed in terms of how focused it has been on? And it's off the back of changing the gender potentially, and this kind of government consultation on the Gender Recognition Act. What has most kind of disappointed you, or have you taken away from it?
Most disappointing thing, I think, is the lack of trans voices in those. The fact that there are even debates, you know what I mean? I do a lot of race, quote unquote, debates, and it's always set up as me, the black person, then a white person who doesn't believe that I have a right to exist or express myself in any way. And I see a lot of that. That's what Jane and I often, like, we'll drop each other a DM on Twitter when it's getting really bad. And we draw a lot of parallels with that. And I don't understand why more people don't draw parallels with have a bit more empathy. It's the thing I don't like about what's going on in the media. It's so cruel. It's really cruel. It's really nasty. And it's, you know, fine for maybe, you know, somebody who's got a media presence, somebody who's got a voice, maybe someone, I'm not even saying it's fine for someone who's got that, but at the end of the day, then what about, I always take it back to my friend's trans daughter, who I just adore. And I always think, what does she think when she sees this stuff? How must she feel as a kid hearing this stuff? This just, you know, that she's a potential rapist, that her body is so disgusting and we don't want her anywhere near us. That's what's disappointing to me. It's cruel.
I totally agree. That is the most disappointing, and, you know, I mean, it's beyond disappointing. It's just so horrendous that trans women are treated as a threat and as pariahs. You know, it sort of reminds me of the way that, you know, gay men have been treated as, you know, sexual predators, you know, in I don't know, I suppose the 80s, and as paedophiles. And, you know, it seems like, you know, every few decades we have something like this around another kind of minority, a marginalized group. And, you know, and there's so much violence against all women, and, you know, trans women are not men. And so it just doesn't make sense to me. You know, trans women have been, you know, many trans women have been happily using, you know, sitting next to non-trans women like me, you know, in cubicles, doing, you know, what they need to do quite happily. And I don't know of any cases where trans women have been a threat to cis women. It's been, in my experience, and it's been, you know, cis women who have been policing and problematic for other cis women and trans women. And I think that's, you know, that's really disappointing. And also the fact that the focus is so limited, and it just, you know, there's such a bigger picture to look at, you know, more generally about patriarchy, you know, which we're all affected by. And I sometimes feel like when non-trans men get on the anti-trans bandwagon, it's because, you know, it's easier for them to punch down, and, you know, finally the target is off their back, and, you know, they too can join with women, you know, non-trans women, and it's deeply disappointing, and it's you know, it's not really looking at what the real problem is here, and we all have a you know, a joint cause to fight against and for, you know, safety for everyone, and, you know, adequate provision for everyone, you know, and, you know, intersectional, thoughtful, you know, design.
It's what Jane and Ava have just said as well. It's very interesting about how you bring up, Ava, you say it's always a black woman against a woman. It's always presented in this very adversarial, gladiatorial way. So how perhaps would you like to see the media conversation change to move away from this one against one polarization debate?
I mean, at Vice, during the Gender Recognition consultation period, Gender Recognition Act consultation period, we ran a campaign encouraging our readers and anyone who basically thought that what was happening in the UK, the scaremongering and the fearmongering of trans people, was bullshit, to submit their response to the consultation and advocate for reform of the Gender Recognition Act. And I was quite shocked at how newspapers, even left-leaning papers like The Guardian, weren't coming out as strongly in favor of it as we were. I think maybe to some extent it's an age thing, in that people from my generation, who are, I guess, kind of millennials, who are like teetering on the edge of being Gen Z, stuff like this just isn't up for debate anymore, because we've grown up, you know, watching shows like Glee and Pose. You know, the Caitlyn Jenner Time cover was a really pivotal moment for people I know who are around my age in terms of trans recognition and trans visibility. It's just not a debate for people of that generation anymore. But having said that, we did have lots of little pop-up stalls around London and various universities around the UK asking people to sign up and advocate for reform to the Gender Recognition Act. And there were older women who came down as well. You know, there was a very, very sweet 70-something-year-old lesbian who came down with her partner and said that she needed help to fill out the form because her eyesight wasn't great. And then she said, you know, this has been happening for decades. It's the same old women who were trying to fight against trans women and men in their 70s and 80s, and they're doing it now. So I don't know if it's necessarily a generational thing or an age thing, but I do know that, especially in the press, at least over the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, there's been a real pushback, especially in the UK. And it's something that seems so uniquely British as well, or even just English, really, because I think Scotland is slightly ahead of us on this point. My American colleagues, when I used to be editor of a feminist publication called Broadly, which is part of Vice, they were completely baffled by what was going on in the UK. They genuinely just would not understand. They were like, you know, but these people, you know, they say they are left-wing and they support feminism and they're ideologically supposed to be on our side, but why have they kind of hopped onto this issue that we would see Republicans hop onto, and not just any Republicans, but Republicans of the most extreme conservative Christian morality, Christian values kind of bandwagon. Why are they kind of hopping on that? It doesn't make any sense, and I still don't quite understand it myself. I mean, it just seems like a very particular kind of British poison that's kind of entered the media discourse against trans people.
I think that's the problem. They've been labelled left-wing, and I keep trying to point out they're not. They are racist as hell. There's a group of the commentariat who are white women, white middle-class women I would agree with you, I don't see many very young women in that group. I see them all to be late 30s upwards, who have just decided that they are the gatekeepers. And because you write for The Guardian, it doesn't make you left-wing. And I think along with the political spectrum and the views that we've had, if you look in the UK, we've had a shift right, and it's been going on for the last decade. So what some people determine as left-wing, because, maybe every now and again they might say, oh gosh, I do feel sorry for the homeless. Oh my God, she's so left-wing. But they're not. Look at what they do. They're really nasty. And I think that their voices are really the loudest. I've had many confrontations with these women, literally, we've just all blocked each other at this point. I'm thankful I don't really see that much of it anymore, but they have decided what is womanhood. And womanhood doesn't look like me. Womanhood doesn't look like using. It doesn't look like, a lot of trans women either. That's what they just don't want to have it. And I do think the thing that we need to address, which people, cis women, are for, is jealousy. There's a lot of jealousy for trans women, a lot of envy. People don't want to admit that. And because if you see what, I don't even know if we're supposed to name people, but there's certain Guardian columnists wrote saying, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the body of a Brazilian trans woman. I'm like, what are you on? They have one of the highest death rates in the world. Are you okay right now? But it is, oh, we struggled with our bodies growing up. We didn't feel comfortable. We got our periods. We feel this, we feel that. How dare they saunter in and just adopt womanhood like that? How dare they saunter in and wear makeup and, have breast implants and have their breasts, high up in the air when I've breastfed 3 children. It's a lot of anger. It's a lot of not understanding. And I think that, Zing mentioned Pose. I always send everybody to Pose to have a look, to say, look, really? Just look at the authenticity. And I will always, if they're interested, send them Janet Mock's book. If you think it's hard being a woman, try being a woman with a penis. That's way harder. It's way harder. There's so many things that we could meet in the middle on, and we could talk about being objectified and trans women just having straight trans women having cis men who want to be with them in the dark but never ever out in public, and loads of stuff that we all have, but they just won't see it. They won't. And I think jealousy and anger.
I think there's a sense that womanhood has to be something that's earned, as if you have to go through the wars literally to be considered a woman. Oh, you don't have period pains, you haven't had childbirth, you haven't gone through the menopause, therefore you're not a woman in my eyes. But that's a completely reductive idea of what being a woman is. I haven't had a kid, I haven't been through the menopause. There's lots of cis women who won't ever have any of those experiences either. There are plenty of cis women who don't experience the being catcalled on the street constantly. So the more we try and gatekeep what experiences, and especially the negative experiences of what makes a woman, the more you just end up excluding everyone else except for yourself. And that's what I find really depressing about the whole debate. It's that it's so reductive, and it focuses on the things that are exclusionary and that don't accommodate the maximum number of women that just want to kind of keep this idea of womanhood so narrow and so kind of depressingly small, and focused on experiences of, you know, like, for example, pain. I just find it quite sad. I don't know why anyone would want to do that, because personally, I've had so much more better encounters by trying to see the commonalities in all the experiences of the women that I know, rather than focusing on the things that differentiate us.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And, you know, there's also a sort of debate that goes on amongst some lesbians who say, oh, we're losing our butches to being trans, which also is not a new debate. I mean, I remember that coming up in, you know, the 90s. And it's just this, again, this really reductive idea of, you know, going of what people can be. It's just like, well, you know, maybe in the past, the women that identified, you know, the people that identified as butch, you know, were only able to do that because of what, you know, because of the lack of trans visibility, you know, and the possibilities in terms of surgery, et cetera. And now, you know, a lot of the people that did identify as butch and lesbian have realized that that actually wasn't, you know, that was, you know, okay for then, but not okay for now. And why shouldn't people be able to change how they express themselves? We all change through life. We all change in terms of how we think, how we present ourselves. You know, humans are an evolving species, and you know, this idea that there's this linear path, you know, that cannot be changed, you know, is I think not true to life. And also, what about all the, you know, in terms of losing and gaining lesbians, you know, what about all the trans women who are lesbians? It's just like, yay. You know, we've got loads of, you know, trans lesbians, and that's, you know, that's a good thing, right?
The way I see it though is it really, I can draw a parallel with white supremacy. It will, to survive, it will open the doors to certain people and let them in. Like if you look years ago, Irish people were not considered white. White Jewish people were not considered white. Polish people were not considered white. But as it's getting smaller, what they'll do is they'll open up a tiny little gap and say, all right, you can come through now. Irish people, yay, you're white. And it's the same with what's happening with womanhood right now. These women are seeing that their group is small. We're not interested as other people. So what they've done is now open the door and like, okay, butch lesbians, come on in now. You can be women. I worked in Holloway Prison in the late 90s. And when I was speaking at Oxford, and this is what I was trying to explain to this butch lesbian in the audience, everything you're saying now, I heard about you. When I worked in Holloway Prison, most of the staff were lesbian women. A lot of them were butch lesbian women. It was the same stuff. Talking about cabals. If you go and Google, there was a story in the Evening Standard about the lesbian cabal in Holloway Prison, and they were so threatening and they were such bullies, and they had to take away these senior officers. They were sexual predators. They were preying on all the female staff that came in and turning them all into lesbians. And I was like, everything you're saying to me about trans women is what I heard about you. How can you not? It's not the same. I went, it's exactly the same. And I just think that what happens is some groups they feel excluded, and they desperately want to be part of something else, and they wanted to oh, we are women. And when that door got open to them, they just ran through it and slammed it behind them. And I always say it's a very worrying thing to do, because believe me, when they're done with trans women, they will come back for you. They will. And that's indisputable. That is the way it always works. They will use you for their own survival. And when they're done with you, goodness gracious. I mean, look at the LGBT Alliance. They have joined in with all of this anti-trans hate. They've opened up conversations. Now, what do we have debated in Parliament? Conversion therapy. You know, we're talking about really going back. Oh, should we bring back Section 28? Should we really talk about sexuality at school? You saw the protests in Birmingham and stuff like that. Oh no, you're not allowed to talk about this in school. What did you think was going to happen when you chuck trans people under the bus? It's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to maybe solutions or what you're hopeful for, what would you like to kind of see in the future over the next few months in terms of detoxifying this debate or moving forward to kind of more the better spaces for women? Has anyone had any kind of thoughts around on what might be solution?
I mean, speaking from a media perspective, I think that there are a lot of journalists and presenters and producers who need to think about the way they're framing issues around bathroom access and trans rights more generally, and ask yourself, is it right that while you might not provide a anti-climate change perspective in an article about climate change, is it right that you're providing an anti-trans perspective in an article about trans rights or trans people? Because I think that the whole issue of this being presented as a pro and anti debate, things like human rights and civil liberties shouldn't be presented like that. I just firmly believe that that is just a slippery slope you just do not want to go down, because eventually you're going to be platforming charlatans basically, and people who are just engaging in this debate for, well, not even a debate really, for disingenuous reasons, for people who want to increase their media profile or just bandwagon hopping. There are plenty of really good stories about trans experiences that should be written by trans people. I would strongly suggest that people look into investing in those rather than returning to the same old hackneyed kind of issues around bathroom access and people wanting to be known by their preferred pronouns. These are not even the most interesting things about the trans experience or being trans. And I think it's just a real failure of imagination for a lot of journalists that they keep returning to these same old tired tropes that are just ultimately quite harmful for trans people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really...
Sorry, go on, Jane.
Well, I was just going to say, I totally agree that it's so important, and you're absolutely right, Zing, about, you know, the failure of imagination and who is doing the talking. You know, generally speaking, you know, it is white, cis, middle class people, who able-bodied people who are, you know, in most of the positions of power, deciding, you know, how to frame things, and also who are, because of their own lived experience, perhaps of not having been, you know, have their sort of not having been othered, let's say, they sort of define they define these things as opinions, and it's actually people's human lives and rights. And it's what Zing's saying about debating. You know, you're debating people's lives. It's not an opinion. And I think that's really got to shift as well, the understanding of that. But that comes with giving the mic to different people, basically, you know, who get that. And I think that, you know, as I was saying before, you know, that also hopefully will beget, in terms of toilet provision, a different approach to that, and, you know, a real thoughtfulness about that. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add, really.
I would say, as a solution, I would agree with Jane and Zing in terms of listening to trans voices. My friend sadly passed away 2 days ago. It was called Paul Lucas. He was a cis gay man from New York, and he wrote, he didn't write it, he gathered lots of testimonies from trans people and put on a play called Transcripts. And it was an Edinburgh Festival, and he had it in New York, and he put so much work into that. Like, he became a huge advocate for trans people and trans rights. And I think the other thing that we have to do is make it not profitable, because I keep going back to this, but it's just the way that I process stuff and think about stuff. But as a Black person, I can see the profit in Black rage, I can see, like, you know, it's almost like companies will put a gollywog on a t-shirt and go, oh gosh, what did we do? Because you know you're going to get, you know, a million tweets on the subject. You know that people are going to start talking about it and be outraged about it. But I think if we make it non-profitable, and I think that's what we have to do, we have to make sure that it's not, you know, a spectacle. It's not something that we tune into and we all go, oh my God, and we're like voyeurs about it. It's like, we need to make it unbearable the same way you have to make it unbearable with racism and stuff. We need to make people know that if you come out with transphobic stuff like that, it's not going to be worth it for your life. Like, literally, we will make you so miserable. We will not get off your case. That the next time you go and your lips fixed to say something transphobic, you go, yeah, no, I better just leave that alone. And I think that is how you change stuff. That's how Black people change stuff. It's like you fight and you fight and you fight and you keep on.
I think personally for myself as well, I can completely, the alternative ways and the power of social media is some positive thing. We have seen a lot of toxicity in this debate on social media, but actually sometimes you can use it for good, and you can use it to kind of find clever ways to fight around this. I mean, same thing where young people are fighting back against Trump in really innovative ways in America by using technology and social media. But also I would really like us to take out this conversation that we always have, well, what is a woman? And, you know, we always see this thrown at British politicians or in interviews, and actually kind of change the debate to what is a woman? You know, what does being a woman mean is actually more important, and what are those different experiences? And we absolutely don't cater to all those nuances of being a woman. We just cater to that one ideal in our mind that we have, and perhaps that's where much of the fear comes from, in terms of, you were saying earlier, Ava, about how there's a jealousy around women who have to look a certain way, and if we detoxify that, perhaps that takes out some of the negativity of it in terms of pitting women against women. And it is just this age-old debate of what society thinks women should be, and it's really sad to see it now move into this sphere.
Yeah, I mean, like each decade or each generation, you know, there's a new limit set on, you know, what it is, and as Ava, I think, was saying before, just that the door, you know, it sort of gets narrower and narrower, and people shutting the door behind them. I read something really great, as I invariably do, on Monroe Bergdorf's Instagram today. She wrote something in Vogue about you know, hope for, you know, the hope that she's taking from 2020. And one of the things that stuck out to me was saying, become an ally to someone who is different to you. And I think that's really crucial in terms of what we've been talking about today. I mean, not just someone, maybe people. Become allies to people who are different to you, and, you know, get to learn about other people's lived experiences, and, you know, sort of go beyond your own lived experience, and get out there. And I honestly think, I don't know, but I honestly think that the people that are transphobic are, you know, maybe they don't have any trans people in their lives. I mean, they say they do, but, you know, I think that it's really, really important to get outside of your own, the people that look like you. And I think that, you know, is also part of the solution.
I agree with that, definitely. Like I said, if I hear something transphobic, I mean, I've cleaned, you know, hopefully I've got the right people around me, but occasionally I will go out with friends of friends and I will hear something, and because I can just see this little trans girl's face in my head, if I hear, you know, the T word or something, you can't let that go. I think if you have friends, if you have LGBT friends, if you have Jewish friends, if you have Muslim friends, when you hear that stuff, I think that's so important, because you see your friends in your head and you have to go, I'm sorry, I can't allow that. You know, I haven't heard the word for ages, but I was out with somebody and she used the F word in relation to a gay man. And I was like, oh my, like faces were flashing in my head going, like my friend's like, you better say something, girl. Like I was like, I'll say, you know, you have to do that. And I think, yeah, widening your circle if it's possible, you know, and that's why I agree with Jane with online. I've learned so much more about trans people from trans people online. That is where actually I get most of my education from at the moment, from following and listening and, you know, just little things that you don't think about. For instance, like a common question I would know never to ask, which I would have asked you, is, what was your name before? You know, things like that. Like, you know, you just got to listen. And when you go, oh my gosh, okay, that's not something you say to anybody ever. All those little things, you just listen to trans people.
Just one additional thing on trans men. You know, the trans men I know who have talked to me about toilets have said that they don't really like going in men's toilets, you know, for two main reasons, because it doesn't necessarily feel safe if they don't feel that they're, you know, their presentation, you know, matches with what, you know, the average guy thinks, and also just the dirt, you know, it's just not, you know, it's pretty gross. So, you know, I don't think we can't leave trans men out of the conversation either, because, you know, their experiences are also really important in terms of, you know, adequate toilet provision.
I also think that there's so many spaces that have had kind of inclusive toilets for years without ever presenting it that way. I mean, Jane mentioned Sketch, which is a really, you know, quite a posh restaurant in central London. You know, influencers go there, celebs go there, and I've never thought to think of the toilets as being gender inclusive, but they are, because they are essentially weird little egg-shaped pods where everything's completely sealed in private. And the hand washing facilities are just up for general use in one gigantic egg-shaped hole. But it is gender inclusive. And, you know, I've been to so many clubs and bars and where everyone just piles into the same toilet just because that's the way the club is set out and it's been designed, and it's never presented as a gender inclusive toilet, but that's just the way it is, and people just get on with it. And I think that instead of kind of pitting this issue as a kind of men's toilets versus women's toilets issue, it's like, well, why can't we just build more toilets for everyone, really, and make them accessible to disabled people, to people who might have to change nappies, whether, you know, whether they're a single parent or not, people who have to bring in their children to use the loos. There just needs to be more of them. They just need to be better designed. And it's not just a trans issue, as I think that has been presented in the papers for so long. It's an issue that affects literally everyone, because everyone needs to pee.
Yeah.
Basic human functionality, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it at that for today, but thank you all for such a fascinating talk. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, there are many issues facing women, and we are looking to balance these conversations across many lived experiences, and sadly we couldn't include all those voices today. So please do look out for our follow-up podcast in September and much more. And that just leaves me to thank our guests, Jane, Singh and Ava. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you all for listening.